Okay, so we're back for another Gate Roller deck profile. This one is sort of like a control deck. We are using Wizard, but the main focus was to focus the deck around Suppressor Mage, which stop or prevents either player from using Overdrive or touchdown abilities. So some of the deck has other units that will do something similar, or to try to prevent them. I wanted to make this deck a lot earlier when I first started constructing decks. The only problem was when I started building it, I would put like 4 of this, and then I started putting other cards. And eventually it came down to where I wanted to put so many other different cards that the deck completely changed. And then it felt like this card was just very clunky inside of it. So I just kept pushing this deck onto the side. But then after constructing a lot of decks, I kind of know what cards I didn't want to put in this deck, because otherwise it would make me want to change the deck completely. So we're mainly focusing on Suppressor Mage as kind of a control deck. And this deck is, because it is a control deck, because this game does not have sideboarding, this deck only really functions or like prevents other opponents' decks from functioning if you know the meta of where you're playing. So like if you're playing a lot of, like if your community or your play group doesn't have a lot of counters, or sorry, touchdowns or overdrive abilities, or even special summoning, this deck may not do as much against them. But if you do know the type of ones that your play group or community plays, the deck can be actually pretty good at stopping, like the smaller things, and then just disrupting some plays can actually be very detrimental to your opponent. So again, we are playing Wizard, and then even though we do have less life, the hope is that with some of the units that we're using in some of our events, that we'll be able to prevent most damage, because most of the time they'll hopefully not be attacking us, because they want to try to clear away some of our pesky units on the side. And then with Wizard, it also allows us that we always have 2 energy on our opponent's turn, because there are a lot of events that we want to use reactively depending on the situation. So the first card we have is for Orbit Trooper Tenrai. So just a very good 6/6/2 with Defender, as well as Retaliate. So again, Retaliate is where at the end of the damage step, if it's been attacked, if it's still alive, it will deal its attack back to the enemy unit. It does not attack back the enemy ruler. Okay, so it only does attack. So even though Retaliates whenever it's attacked, it only counts units to deal back the damage to. So it doesn't deal its strike back to the ruler. Okay, so usually sometimes it means that your opponent will be attacking with the ruler first, and then try to deal damage. If they can't get over with 1 unit in 1 hit, and then they'll use like the second unit to try to kill it, so that way they don't lose anything. But we are running other cards that will make it where they may end up losing units anyway, and then this will kind of like stop them from attacking or dealing damage to us at all. So next again we have the 4 Suppressor Mage. So 5/4/2, very good attack stat for getting rid of most things. But it also has a DR3 if you want to choose 1 card in your opponent's damage zone and flip it face down. So this can be useful in certain matchups where your opponent tries to, if they utilize cards for specific types, or if they DR specific types, you can kind of use this to flip down someone's. But it's usually not that relevant. At least in set 3 format. But there are some cards that have been previewed for set 4 where flipping specific cards down would actually be a very good thing. But then we're mainly using this for its no shenanigans allowed, which is, again, players cannot use touchdown or overdrive abilities. Next we have for Zetsuya, Master Onmyoji. So we don't really use it for its counter ability, which is your opponent gets to choose like 1 of the set cards and then we destroy the rest of them. There may be some times where that might be useful, maybe against like other decks like this one where it uses a lot of sets, and then usually we always have quite a bit face down. But this card is in here because it doesn't allow your opponent to special summon, so it stops Genesis summoning decks, Abyssal summoning, or anything of that nature where they special summon units. So even like with Schrodinger's cat, it will prevent Schrodinger from special summoning itself. And then you can also use it for its instant action, which is the DR3, and you can negate an overdrive or touchdown ability. So similar to like Suppressor Mage, we're canceling that out, but we also have the ability to sub special summons. The only difference is that this card is a lot weaker in terms of attack and defense stats, as well as it also uses a counter slot, which I was not too much of a fan of. So I wanted to cut this down to actually a little bit less, because I wanted to run the Spirit Deity Sisters, the one that prevents special summoning as well. The only thing was that it didn't have the ability to like stop, touchdown, and overdrive abilities like Zetsuya, so that's why I think Zetsuya is actually fine as it is. Next we have is for autonomous seiran. So seiran is 552. We're only using it for its ability of while it's in your attack zone, any combat damage dealt to you becomes 0, meaning that your opponent cannot actually deal any damage by attacking to you until they get rid of seiran. So being 5 stat means that they do have to use a specific units to kill it, but we are using some events to prevent that, so that way they waste multiple attacks on just killing these units. Then we have 4 Mr. Obsolete. So similar to Seiran. So as long as he's in attack zone, if you would be dealt combat damage, units to take 0 damage. They're just worded a little differently, probably because of the way they wanted to change the template of the wording, so it was a lot more clear. So Seiran is the more accurate term, but it's pretty much would be the same as Mr. Obsolete. So as long as they're in the attack zone, you won't take any damage. He's a lot weaker, but he is a level 1, meaning that he's a lot easier to play. During our turn, because we are playing Wizard and we don't have any like cost reductions. And this is actually all the units that we're running. The rest of the deck is all events. Because the whole point is to keep these units specifically alive, and then having your opponent waste multiple attacks taking out, these units, so that way, they can try to do things or, be able to do you damage. So our first event we have is the Grace of Spring. So this card is, you look at the top 4 and you can take a non-legendary. We're actually not running any legendaries in this deck. You could probably change out some of these events for some of the counters that we're running near the end. But then I feel that we don't really need legendaries in this deck. You could run some of those events that, like the Kami's Judgment for the level 2. But I don't think it's as worth it. But with Spring of Grace, it lets us dig for any of the units that we have up here. Is usually the main ones you want. Or if you already have the units there, you can actually look for defensive events so that we can prevent them from dying to your opponent to keep them alive. Next we have 4 Rite of Redirection. So this is when an allied unit is about to be dealt damage, or yourself, and then you can make the next damage that is dealt to the target become 0 instead. So say if they try to like attack, Seiran or Mr. Obsolete, or even your Zetsuya or Guild Mage, because they want to try to get rid of it, you can play this, and then what that does is essentially it wastes that whole attack, and it means they have to commit another attack if they want to try to get rid of it. Especially for like Seiran and Mr. Obsolete, this is one of the most important ones to block. Next we have 4 Battle of the First Breach. So this one is you get to choose an enemy unit until end of turn. It gets 2 attack and intercept, meaning that for a lot of these it'll at least be 5 damage, but then for like Seiran or Guild Mage it will actually become a 7 attacker, meaning that if they attack it with a lot like even bigger units, it will instantly kill it. So intercept kills it's like first strike from like Magic, where it'll deal its damage first and essentially get rid of so it'll do 2 things, where it'll essentially counter the attack, and it will also get rid of your opponent's unit. So this is one of the main ones that we want to use to keep, like our Mr. Obsoletes alive, Seiran's, Guild Mage, Zetsuya, or even Orbit Tenrai. When they try to attack it, you can get rid of it, so that way they have to waste more attacks trying to get through your units. This next one is the 2-Pat. So this is the counter slot that is the most flexible. Originally, I had it as the level 2 event that on counter restands a resource, or if not, is level 2 that draw 2. The only problem was that being a 2 cost meant that I could play it, draw 2 cards, but then I wouldn't be able to play any of my units other than like a Mr. Obsolete. Whereas like the Grace of Spring allows me to search for anything except for like tenrai, and I can still play it on that turn because I do have to use up energy. But there were 2 Pats. It's actually not a bad one, because its counter is a lot more useful than the one that restands resources, because you are a wizard, so you restand on your opponent's turn anyway. So you could use this. Very rarely would we ever get like no cards in hand, or 1 or less cards and 0 sets for that second ability where we can draw 2. But you never know if it will happen at some point. And then just counter checking it to draw a card is just very good. Next we have 4 Rite of Kami Scorn. So again, you can play it at any time, and the next damage dealt to you or an ally unit becomes 0. So again, prevents, similar to Rite of Redirection, it prevents our units from dying or taking any damage. We're also running 4 shields up, so this is to protect us, because it doesn't stop units from taking damage. But at some point, if your opponents do end up clearing them and then they try to attack you, you can use this to prevent any damage. Because again, being wizard, we have one of the lowest life totals, so we want to try to prevent as much of damage as possible. The next we have 4 Space Cave. So you can set this, and then again, whenever you are about to be dealt damage, you can reduce damage by 2. So this is similar to Space Cave, or to Shields Up, where you can prevent damage only to yourself. You can't stop, you can't protect units from taking damage, but its counter ability is very good because it stops, like say if your opponent actually does hit you, like if you have nothing on the field and they start attacking you directly, you can use Space Cave to kind of stop the number of attackers attacking you as well. The last we card have is 2 Desperate Resistance. So this one is just choosing an ally unit and it gets 3 HP. So a lot of these units, even like Mr. Obsolete, getting 3 HP means it's a 6 HP minimum. And then like Seiran would become an 8. Zetsuya also becomes a 6. Guild Mage becomes a 7. And then like tenrai becomes a 9. So for some of these units, that means that like the basic unit, if your opponent tries to use the bare minimum to try to get rid of it, aside from taking into account, like battle, where they'll get intercept, or even just taking into account like the 0 damage, with Desperate Resistance also means that they have to try to think about, are they fine, using a unit that may not have enough attack to get over it if they use like Desperate Resistance, even especially with like tenrai, if your opponent say tries to attack with the ruler first and they attack with a unit that can just barely get over it because maybe they dealt 4 damage, so they're like, okay, I only need 2 damage, I'll attack something with 3 attack, and then you can play Desperate Resistance, and what it does is it stops the attack, they'll lose that unit, and then they have to waste they're pretty much their last attack on it to get rid of it, and that's implying that you don't have another one of like reduce damage to 0 or something like that. So that is all for this deck profile. So the deck list will be in the description below. And then throughout the coming weeks, again, if you have any, until we get, full, like set 4, which doesn't come till like the end of March. If you have other decks that you would like to see still, if there's certain cards that you would like, focused on that maybe people haven't already made yet, you can always comment in the comment section below, and then I'll do my best to try to push out a deck. But usually I'll be slowing down on deck builds a little bit. I'll probably still try to do maybe 1 deck a week, because I am kind of running low on like decks that I really want to try or are interested in trying, because I've constructed quite a bit actually, especially when the first set came out, and I've gone through most of the list of decks I've wanted to build, and then there are people that have done other decks as well. But with that, thank you for watching, and then I will see you guys in the next one.